The average American worker is almost twice as productive as they were in 1979. Their pay went up by less than $2 an hour. That's not a typo. It's a math problem with a very ugly answer. Today I'm breaking down exactly why putting in more effort is quietly bleeding you dry, and it starts with a number so absurd you'll think I made it up. The counterintuitive claim. Here's a fact that should make you angry. Between 1979 and 2025, net productivity in the US economy rose 92.4%. Workers produced nearly double the output per hour. Their hourly compensation, it rose 33.6%. Productivity grew 2.7 times faster than pay. The extra value went somewhere, just not into your paycheck. Let me make this more personal. In 1979, the real median hourly wage was about $17.48. By 2023, adjusted for inflation, it was $19.24. That's less than $2 of real gain over 44 years. The economy nearly tripled in size, and the typical worker got enough extra to buy one additional coffee per hour, which is, not ideal. Here's where the distribution tells the real story. Between 1979 and 2013, middle wage workers saw real hourly wage growth of about 6%. Low wage workers actually lost ground, down 5%. But very high earners, they gained 41%. The pie got bigger. Almost all the extra slices went to the same people. Real average hourly earnings in 2018 had roughly the same purchasing power as in 1978, 4 decades of treading water. This isn't about laziness versus hustle. It's about a system where effort and reward decoupled a long time ago, and most people never got the memo. But the wage gap is only the first layer, because once you actually earn that extra money, the tax system has some opinions about how much of it you get to keep. Marginal tax rates. Here's something nobody tells you when you sign up for overtime. The US federal income tax has 7 brackets: 10, 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, and 37%. Each dollar you earn gets taxed at a rate at least as high as the last one. So far, so obvious, but let me show you what this actually looks like in practice. Say you're a single worker making $48,000 a year, you pick up some extra shifts, earn an additional $2,000 in overtime. That entire $2,000 gets taxed at 22%, not 12%, because you cross the bracket threshold at $48,475. That's $440 gone before you've even looked at the rest of the bill, and the rest of the bill is ugly. Payroll taxes hit every single labor dollar regardless of bracket. That's 6.2% for Social Security plus 1.45% for Medicare. Stack a 22% federal rate, 7.65% payroll, and a modest 5% state tax, and your combined marginal rate is roughly 34.65%. A worker earning $30 an hour keeps about 19.61 of each extra hour. That's not a rounding error. That's a third of your overtime disappearing into the tax system before it ever touches your bank account. Now here's where it gets interesting. Long-term capital gains are taxed at 0, 15, or 20%. A single filer earning under $48,350 pays literally 0 federal tax on investment gains. Qualified dividends get the same treatment. And unrealized gains taxed at nothing. 0. Until you decide to sell. So the person working extra hours faces 34% marginal rate on every additional dollar of labor. The person whose money makes money can pay 0 on those gains at the same income level. This isn't a bug, this is the architecture. But if you think the tax code is the only thing eating your overtime check, wait until you see what those extra hours are actually costing you. The opportunity cost of time. Nobody sends you an invoice for the hours you didn't invest. There's no line item on your paycheck that says cost of not building assets this week. $847. But that bill exists, and it's compounding silently every single year you ignore it. Here's the thing. Every hour you spend working overtime is an hour you didn't spend building something that grows while you sleep. And unlike your paycheck, the cost of that trade-off gets exponentially more expensive the longer you wait. Let me make this concrete. $10,000 invested at a 7% annual return grows to approximately $76,000. One go to $23 after 30 years. You didn't grind weekends for that. The math just did its thing. But here's where it gets painful. An investor who starts at 25, stops completely at 35, and never adds another dollar often ends up with more than someone who starts at 35 and invests every year until 60. The early investor contributed less total money and still won, because compounding doesn't care about effort, it cares about time. Now consider this, you could work 10 extra hours a week at $25 an hour. Over 5 years, that's roughly $65,000 before tax, but take those same 10 hours, spend them reskilling for 2 years, then land a role paying $40 an hour. In just the 3 years after that transition, you've generated $93,600 in surplus over what you would have earned, and that gap keeps widening every year after. And here's what nobody talks about. Chronic overwork doesn't just cost you investment years. The person grinding 60-hour weeks is operating with degraded cognitive bandwidth. They're too exhausted to research index funds, too fried to set up automatic contributions, too burned out to even think about where their money should go. The overtime is literally destroying their ability to make the financial decisions that would actually make them wealthy. But if you think missed compounding is bad, wait until you see what happens when those overtime dollars do show up in your account. Because your brain has a very specific, very expensive response to seeing more money, you get a raise, and somehow you're still broke 3 months later. That's not bad luck. That's a leak in the system. Lifestyle inflation. Here's the thing about earning more money. It should make you wealthier. Mathematically, it has to, but for most people, it doesn't, because every dollar that flows in immediately flows back out through upgraded spending. You get a $5,000 raise, and within weeks, you've absorbed $4,500 of it into a nicer apartment, a better car payment, slightly more expensive everything, your net gain toward actual wealth, $500. Congratulations. And it's not even your fault, not entirely. Lifestyle creep is driven by social comparison. You see your coworker's new car, your friends' vacation photos, and your brain quietly recalibrates what normal looks like. Each raise doesn't feel like progress, it feels like permission to finally live at the level everyone around you already seems to be at. But here's where it gets worse. The hedonic treadmill means you don't even get to keep the happiness. That bigger apartment feels exciting for about 2 months, then it's just where you live. The newer car is thrilling until it's just your car. Your expectations ratchet up to match your spending, and now you need another raise just to feel the same temporary bump. And 95% of workers say their wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. Yet among families below the 25th income percentile, vehicles per household nearly doubled from 0.76 in 1980 to 1.4 in 2015. People found ways to spend more without actually earning more, which is, not ideal. High-income households expand their spending and their investments simultaneously because they have enough to do both. Lower-income households are cutting spending just to cope with rising costs. If your marginal propensity to consume every extra dollar is near 100%, then the marginal contribution of that dollar to your net worth approaches zero. Doesn't matter how many hours produced it, but lifestyle inflation is really just one symptom of a deeper problem. Because even if you controlled your spending perfectly, there's a mathematical ceiling on how much happiness each additional dollar can actually buy you. Diminishing marginal utility. Here's the thing about money that nobody wants to hear. The first dollar you earn is worth more to you than the 100,000th dollar. Not in some abstract philosophical sense, in a very real, measurable, your brain literally cares less about its sense. Think about it like pizza. The first slice when you're starving? Incredible. The second slice? Still great. The fifth slice? You're eating out of obligation. By the seventh slice, you actively hate yourself. That's diminishing marginal utility, and it applies to every single dollar past the ones keeping your lights on. At low income levels, additional money is transformative. It covers rent, it puts food on the table, it eliminates the kind of stress that makes you physically sick. The 2008 stimulus checks proved this perfectly. Low-income recipients showed the strongest gains in well-being, not because they got more money, but because those dollars actually did something. The first dollars have outsized impact. The later dollars, steep diminishing returns. But here's where it gets complicated. A cross-national study found that the correlation between income and happiness has actually increased in the United States over the past 50 years. And it's strongest when both GDP per capita and income inequality are high. In unequal societies, money matters more psychologically, even as its actual utility diminishes, which is, not ideal. So you have a mathematical reality where extra income buys less happiness per dollar, and a psychological reality where inequality makes you feel like you need more anyway. There exists an optimal number of working hours beyond which the fatigue, the stress, and the lost leisure outweigh whatever that extra paycheck delivers. Past that point, your total welfare actually decreases even as your income increases. You're paying more in life than you're getting back in money, and in a high inequality environment, social pressure keeps you grinding past that point anyway. Not because it helps you, because stopping feels like falling behind. You're not chasing happiness anymore, you're running from the perception of failure. But if diminishing returns explain why extra hours don't buy happiness, the next question is obvious. What actually builds wealth if working more doesn't? How wealth is actually built? So if working more hours is a losing strategy, what's actually working? Let's look at where the money ended up. The top 1% of US households hold 30.5% of all wealth, the bottom 50% hold 2.5%. And when you zoom into the stock market specifically, the top 1% owns nearly half of it, while the bottom half owns about 1.1%. That's not a gap. That's a different sport entirely. Here's the thing, capital income, meaning dividends, capital gains, and rent, doesn't care how many hours you work. It generates itself. Returns get reinvested to buy more assets, which generate more returns, which buy more assets. It's exponential. Meanwhile, your wage is linear. You trade 1 hour, you get 1 hour's pay. You trade 2 hours, you get 2 hours pay. Groundbreaking, the tax code makes this worse, or better, depending on which side you're on. Tax-deferred accounts let your earnings compound without getting clipped every year. Employer 401k matches are literally free compounding capital you didn't have to work for, and when you do sell investments, long-term capital gains face rates between 0 and 20%. Your paycheck? 10 to 37%. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Now, entrepreneurship is interesting because the average entrepreneur actually earns less than a comparable employee, but the distribution has a massive upper tail. Business ownership is high variance, but it's the primary channel through which large fortunes get built because businesses can scale without the owner clocking more hours. Real estate works similarly through leverage. A 20% down payment controls 100% of a property's appreciation. A home worth $27,000 in 1970 is worth roughly $500,000 today. And rental income? That's your tenant's labor earnings being transferred directly to you while you sleep. The core distinction is simple. Wage labor has a near linear relationship between hours and income. Capital ownership decouples income from personal time entirely. Systems scale with other inputs while the owner's hours remain fixed. That's not a minor difference. That's the entire game. But if you think this is just about individual choices, the next section might change your mind. The structural point. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. From 1948 to the mid-1970s, productivity and worker pay moved in lockstep. You produced more, you earned more. That wasn't some utopian accident, it was the result of specific policy choices, full employment targets, strong unions, overtime protections, a minimum wage that actually kept up with inflation. The system was configured to share gains, then it was reconfigured not to. The divergence since 1973 isn't economics, it's architecture. Declining union density alone explains roughly a third of male wage inequality growth between 1973 and 2007. Add the erosion of overtime eligibility, a falling real minimum wage, globalization policies that pitted workers against cheaper labor markets while protecting capital flows, and deregulation that let executives claim increasingly absurd shares of firm income through stock options and governance failures. The money didn't disappear, it went somewhere specific, and the structure of employment itself guarantees this outcome. For your labor to be profitable to an employer, your output must exceed your compensation. That's not a flaw in the system, that's the system working as designed. When you work harder, you increase the surplus. Whether you capture any of that surplus depends entirely on your bargaining power, which for most workers has been systematically dismantled over 5 decades. Meanwhile, 25 to 43% of the workforce now does some form of gig work, bearing both halves of payroll tax, building zero employer retirement benefits, facing income volatility as a baseline condition. Working harder, with even less structural pathway to wealth than traditional employment offered. The Economic Policy Institute states it plainly. Wage stagnation is a matter of choice, not necessity. Different policy configurations could distribute productivity gains equitably. The current configuration doesn't. It mechanically channels surplus from labor to capital. That's not a self-help problem. It's not a budgeting failure. It's physics, except it isn't, because someone built the machine and someone chose the settings. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.